The Sanguine Brothers Slaughterhouse, Moonday, first week of autumn, 4718. That evening, Aurelius, Diyanah, Marius, Demi, and Rankle, and their allies Anlel and Goethe, along with the recruited assassin Inga Narrowknife, had agreed to try and investigate the Sanguine Brothers Slaughterhouse, the suspected hideout of some extraplanar creatures of horror, known as Sackles. On the way over, they had stopped to ask a couple of street vendors what they knew of the Sanguine Brothers Slaughterhouse, but only one, who himself sold meats near the meatpacking district, had a detailed story to share.
Several years ago, two wealthy halfling brothers opened a slaughterhouse, catering to Yanmas's noble houses and fine taverns. Although their sprawling operation was not much different from other large meat-processing enterprises, the brothers purchased higher-grade livestock and cultivated a peerless reputation for quality and cleanliness. They called their business Sanguine Brothers Fine Meats, and it became well known throughout Avon Prefecture. Smiling, stylized versions of their faces have always adorned the front of their slaughterhouse, and their visages and glass window eyes became a landmark in the neighborhood. Although the brothers ran their business well for years, they had no other business partner or close confidants. When both brothers died 15 years ago, the slaughterhouse shuttered its doors. The jolly logo faded as years passed, and the Sanguine Brothers Slaughterhouse became another relic of a more prosperous age.
Indeed, this seemed like an accurate summary. The buildings around Sanguine Brothers primarily held warehouses and tenements. The street vendor in question, however, suspected that the once abandoned facility was now occupied, as they had occasionally heard howls or cries coming from the building, but had been too fearful to investigate, or even to file a report with the fire watch.
"Best to keep your head down when it comes to that sort of thing," noted the man.
The sun had set by this point, and a half-moon was starting to rise in the sky as they approached the slaughterhouse. The large building was made of brick and wood, both faded to the same drab shade of brown from years of neglect. 3 squat towers rose up from the rear of the building, and the building's massive doors were chained shut. An aura of long neglect hung over the slaughterhouse.
"Imagine purchasing meat from this place," said Rankle.
"Yes, even if Mr. Argentus at Savory's isn't directly involved in whatever is going on in town," observed Demi. "As soon as we have a spare moment, we should call the fire watch on him, and make him face consequences for his actions." "Okay, as we discussed," said Aurelius. "We're going to do this smart. We're not going through the front. There are 3 towers. I'm sure all 3 have service entrances for roof access. Let's pick one and go through the top."
"I suggest the central tower," said Rankle.
"Any particular reason?" asked Aurelius.
"I don't know," said Rankle. "It's just a gut feeling. If I was hiding something important, I think I'd pick the central tower."
"Works for me," said Aurelius. "Diyanah, you can be very stealthy when you need to be, and you've got the boots of spider climbing. You go up first and lower us a rope. If anyone has magical means of flight or levitation, that'll work too. Once we're up there, Demi is casting Silent Table. Demi, remind everyone how that works." "It's different and in some ways more powerful than a silence spell," explained Demi. "Silence mutes all sound, so we can't speak to each other. Silent Table creates a zone around a target that stretches out about 10 feet. Inside we can all hear each other perfectly normally, but everyone outside of the table zone can't hear us. Marius will be my target, so he'll be the source of our silence, since he tends to be, well, a little bit louder, but also out in front. Marius, if you see an enemy, you have to close with them as quickly as possible. The other nice thing about a Silent Table spell is the enemy can scream at the top of their lungs, thinking that they're sounding an alarm, but in fact they'll actually be being muted by you. They just won't know it." Marius gave Demi a thumbs up. "Okay, let's talk about the Sackles for a minute," said Aurelius. "Demi informs us they are supernatural creatures of fear. That means we'll want Demi singing for the fear resistance. But Demi can only sing if she's within 10 feet of Marius, otherwise she'll be heard by people outside the Silent Table zone. And similarly, we won't benefit from her bardic magic unless we're in the zone as well. That means we have to move grouped up. We only scatter if we see signs of an enemy that might lob a fireball at us, okay?" Everybody nodded. "Second thing about Sackles is that they can shift into the ethereal plane. Now, they can't attack us directly in the ethereal plane, so if we go in and don't see them, they may get the jump on us. That's okay if we react fast and make sure Gerda gets to whomever is injured fast enough. In fact, we may even want them to come into the corporeal plane to attack us, as that's the only way we can kill them. The problem will happen, though, when they realize that we have Dignity's Barb, Coriana's Blade, whatever crazy weapon from Numeria that Rankle is now using, and that we can actually kill them. The moment they realize this, they're going to jaunt back to the ethereal plane, at which point they're lost to us, and we can't kill them." "So what's your plan for that?" asked Marius. "The plan is to stun them, to prevent them from phasing out. I'm hoping we can use spells like Daze and other similar effects that can deny them the ability to escape. We only need to stop them from escaping for a few seconds. If I cast a haste spell, we've all seen how quickly you and Diyanah can bring down even a wyvern or a manticore. We only have to buy a little bit of time, I think, and you guys will deal with them. So each of us should decide, are we dealing damage, or are we trying to stun them and block their escape? I can hold monsters, suggested Rankle. Me too, added Goethe. Great, that'll help. I have a crazy spell that's been very effective at preventing people from taking actions, but it can be a bit chaotic, indicated Demi. Well, explain, said Aurelius. This is no time to be circumspect. I can summon a swarm of monkeys, she said. The monkeys are very distracting. Could prevent them from escaping. Unorthodox, but better than nothing, mused Aurelius. Can you make sure they stay confined to Marius' zone of silence? I'm pretty sure I can, said Demi. Oh, said Diyanah. There's one last thing I should mention that I kind of alluded to earlier. There's this monk technique called the Way of the Empty Body. I used the technique only once before at the Stepped Temple. It can be used to pass into the ethereal plane. If I do that, I'll actually be able to fight the Sakils in their own dimension. But here's the problem. The ability requires a substantial amount of my chi, the life energy that powers my monk abilities. So I think I'm only going to be able to do this once today. And once I do, I'm going to remain ethereal for 1 minute and 1 minute only. Interesting, said Aurelius. So, worst case scenario, if one slips away, you can chase it. Yeah, I'll do that, said Diyanah. But also, once I'm ethereal, you can neither see me nor hear me. And if I'm ethereal, I will use the opportunity to attack any other ethereal creatures I might see, including ones that maybe are in, say, an adjoining room. I know what you're saying, said Marius. Once you disappear, if all the threats are eliminated, rather than wait on you, you'd prefer we keep moving, in case you're in trouble elsewhere. Yeah, that's right, said Diyanah. Oh boy, this sounds like it's going to be perfectly chaotic, said Aurelius. But at least we've talked through all our plans and contingencies. No time like the present. Let's get to it. The party silently scaled the central tower of the Slaughterhouse. There wasn't a service entrance at the top of the tower, however, but there was a trapdoor for roof access. Diyanah gingerly eased it open, and he and Marius, who were leading the party, looked carefully inside. They were looking into the room from the ceiling. If there had been a ladder once to reach the trapdoor, it had long since been removed. 3 large beds were jammed into this room. Each was covered with silks and furs, as though each bed's owner was trying to outdo the others in opulence. The only obvious exit was a flight of stairs that led down from the northwest corner of the room. But the thing that really drew their attention, and most horrifying of all, were 2 immense insectile aberrations stroking each other's antennae in one of the fur-covered beds, their eerily human-like faces twitching with either pleasure or pain. It was difficult to discern which. It was easier for Marius if he simply didn't think about what he was about to do. He gave Diyanah a determined look, popped the blade on Coriana's fist, and jumped onto the bed, swinging the weapon wildly at the creatures. Diyanah followed just as quickly, and the rest of the party reacted almost programmatically. Anlel jumped in after the 2 of them, taking the shape of a mighty treant to smash the Sakils with their thunderous limbs. Finally Inga came in, setting her fear aside and trying her best to engage at the horrific monsters with her light blades. Once the warriors had engaged, Aurelius cast a haste spell to boost their combat efficiency. Goethe and Rankle attempted to each hold a different Sakil in place. Then, as all this was happening, Demi dropped into the room, moving close enough to Marius to hide her noise, and did 2 things. She lent them courage through her bardic song, and then dropped a screaming horde of monkeys onto the 2 Sakils. It was absolute madness. Up close, Marius and Diyanah were both struggling with just how utterly disgusting these creatures were. With each stabbing thrust of his punch dagger, Marius was lopping off twitching insectile claws and lumps of meat and carapace, which caused it to bleed a kind of lumpy yellow pus that had a noxious smell. Diyanah's flaming fists were cooking the creatures, which created an even nastier smell. There was also a terrible bubbling fear rising up inside them. Specifically, they seemed to be experiencing a strange fear that the creatures' gnashing claws were going to dismember them, leaving them permanently and horrifically mutilated. Demi had warned them these creatures would exude a kind of supernatural fear aura, but neither were quite prepared for how visceral and specific the fear would be. Fortunately, Demi's low hum was indeed immunizing them against the worst of this effect. For their part, both the Sakils were stunned by the ferocity and coordination of the mortal attack. For a brief moment they attempted to fight back, clawing back at Marius and Diyanah specifically. But as the treant joined the fray and began battering one of the 2,
and as more mortal humanoids dropped into the room from the trapdoor in the roof, they started trying to escape. However, Rankle and Goethe's magical holding spells were having the intended effect here, and it was difficult to do anything, even for these powerful magical creatures, with all these screeching monkeys everywhere. Finally, Marius was able to get through the stabbing pincer claws of one of the two beasts and connect the pointy end of his punch dagger with an uppercut thrust to the human neck. It came off with a wet squelch, and the whole insectile aberration collapsed sideways and died. The other one, in a final panic, shook off Goethe's magic and threw off as many monkeys as it could before sliding out of reality altogether and disappearing. Diyanah was ready for this. He summoned all his chi and focused, trying to remember the method the elder monks had taught him. He felt his soul swelling up to fill him. Oddly, this whole attempt proved much easier than it had at the monastery. The absence of the angry spirit inside him had improved his mastery over the secret methods of the monks of Irori. He slipped out of the material plane and into the ethereal plane. It was a place of ever-shifting green mists. Here, so close to the material plane, the outline of the walls of the slaughterhouse were still visible, like an echo of the world he had left behind. He could see right through the walls, though, and then, below him, the insects swimming through the air trying to get away from him. There was no below or above, actually, no up or down. There was no gravity in the ethereal plane, and it took Diyanah a minute to remember that it was impossible to swim through the medium of the ethereal plane, as there was no medium. It was a question of using the mind. He oriented himself towards the creature, and he thought onwards, and soon he was accelerating towards it. In fact, he was moving very quickly towards it, closing the empty air faster than the creature could escape him. It occurred to Diyanah that he had carried Aurelius's haste spell into the ethereal plane with him, and the haste spell did make him much faster. Accelerating towards the beast, Diyanah put his arms out and grasped the Sackle's beetle-like back, pummeling it with his flaming fists. As he grappled with it, he could see from the wispy walls around him that the creature had led him out of the tower and down into the factory floor. It had been trying to get help. On the material plane, a man was walking a guard dog on the floor of the building, but it was not a man at all. It was a Sackle, shape-shifted into the form of a man, and half of its insectile, cockroach-like form was visible from the ethereal plane, hanging like a black shroud over the man. Diyanah realized he needed to quickly kill this thing he was fighting before it alerted its friend. One injured Sackle he could handle, but two Sackles at once, he was sure to be overwhelmed. Back on the material plane, Marius looked with surprise as his friend disappeared. "You remember what he said," shouted Marius. "If he goes missing, then we have to press on. No time to regroup. Diyanah might rematerialize somewhere dangerous, and he'll need us." Aurelius's magical haste spell made Marius move supernaturally quickly. He raced down the stairs of the central tower, and found beneath the bedroom a room crowded with dressmakers' dummies, which he ignored, and pressed on through a narrow door on the south wall. Beyond it, a few short steps led down onto a railing that protected a catwalk overlooking a vast factory floor. A single man on guard duty, with a large, angry-looking dog on a leash, patrolled the floor below. Marius wasted no time, vaulting over the catwalk and tumbling towards the man, his supernatural speed allowing him to close the distance very swiftly, the gleaming silver blade drawn on his golden gauntlet. The man looked at Marius. It was clear to him Marius was no ordinary intruder. He immediately shed his disguise, and suddenly another massive, horrendous Sackle stood before him. He swallowed his fear. He could no longer hear Demi singing. She had obviously stopped as soon as Marius had left her behind, and she was no longer in the zone of silence. Thankfully, though, the zone of silence was moving with him, and Marius and the beast were silenced, so at least their fight would not be heard by anything else in the building. Marius was also not alone for very long. Not far behind him, he was being followed by Anlel, who had reverted to her human form to make traversing the stairs and doors easier. She, too, was hasted, and seeing what Marius had done, she leapt over the banister just as Marius had done, and midway down she transformed into a large treant, crashing into the factory floor with a thunderous slam. Inga Narrow-Knife was not far behind her as well. Behind Anlel came Demi, Aurelius, and Goethe. Aurelius cast Daze Monster, Goethe cast Hold Monster, and Demi dropped another horde of chittering monkeys in the Sackle. The dog, which had been set free from the man, suddenly disappeared. No dog at all, the snarling creature was some kind of hellhound, and it teleported right up onto the railing, breathing a stream of hellfire over Aurelius, Demi, and Goethe. Aurelius staggered backwards, while Goethe drew her axe and interceded between the hellhound and the wizard and the bard. Demi reflexively drew Dignity's barb and fired a well-placed lancing bolt of her magic weapon right into the hellhound's ribcage. It winced in pain, but it didn't appear to slow. Meanwhile, down on the factory floor, Marius, Inga, and Anlel battled the Sackle. Previously, they had caught the Sackles by surprise, and they had more frontline attackers without Diyanah there to help, and with this creature being more ready for them, they were struggling against it. With a great blow of one of the scything mantis blades that it lashed out, its sharpened point caught Anlel in the shoulder, biting through the hard, barky exterior of her treant skin. Anlel roared in pain. The wild shape suddenly dismissed. Anlel reverted to human form, and the Sakil discarded her, tossing her body aside like it was a rag doll. Inga stabbed it furiously with her long knives, only to be similarly battered aside. Marius squared off against the monster, once again alone. Up on the catwalk, things were going better. Rodrigo had been summoned behind the hellhound, and was clawing and pecking at its back. With it distracted, Gerta swung her axe and caught the hellbeast in its snarling maw. A great rent cut through its hideous, hellish face. Then Demi took careful aim with Dignity's barb, and with a soft clack put another magical bolt through it, this time right through the creature's eyeball. The hellhound was dead. Down below, Marius parried the creature's clawing pincers and scything blades with his magical shield. He was fighting defensively now, but when he could, he lashed out an opportunistic strike with Coriana's blade. Then Rankle appeared behind the creature, his magical invisibility fading as he stabbed the beast repeatedly in the back with his new technological weapon, the ancient sky metal humming slightly as the disruption field rended carapace and flesh. The creature fled in horror, disappearing into the ethereal void. Marius and Rankle stared at each other in anger and frustration for a moment. They looked back at Aurelius, who shrugged at them from the catwalk above. What could they do? Suddenly the air shimmered before them, and Diyanah stepped through into the material plane. He was dragging with him 2 immense cockroach corpses as well. "Wow, that was close, you guys," he said, slightly out of breath. "I just managed to kill one of these beasties when the other one came fleeing into the ethereal plane. Good job wrapping up that fight in less than a minute, though. My empty body had almost ended when I saw it. Also, these things are tough as hell. Let's agree to never fight them again." Marius rushed forward and gave Diyanah a hug. It was a miracle they had managed to hunt all these things down. "Hey, good to see you too. It's okay, buddy," said Diyanah, surprised by Marius' sudden outpour of emotion. "And someone check on Anlel," said the monk. "She looks like she's in a bad way." Gerda and Demi reached Anlel and Inga. They were going to be okay. "There were 3 beds in the tower, and those are 3 dead Sakils. Let's hope that's the last of them," said Demi as the group reconvened on the factory floor. "But we do have to explore the rest of these rooms, and the other towers, just to be sure." "Yeah, right," said Diyanah. "But I can't do that again, so if they escape this time, they escape for good." "I don't see what choice we have," observed Aurelius. "If we don't kill them all now, they might flee and collect reinforcements from whatever dimension they came from." "Right," said Marius, leaning in close to the other 3. "Let's explore each of the remaining rooms. But Anlel needs to be kept out of the fights for the rest of this. That thing got her pretty bad, and I can see she's looking a little shell-shocked." "No problem. I'll scout ahead," said Rankle, and he faded from sight. They watched as the door to one of the rooms opened and closed. He came out a moment later. "That one is clear. There appears to be an office there. Looks like the hellhound was nesting there as well, but no more monsters now. Those other 3 rooms look like meat lockers, but we should check them too." One of the meat lockers, the one on the far right, featured a pile of bodies. As they opened the door, the smell of rotten meat assailed them. It was almost suffocating. Marius took a half-step inside when he saw a swarm of rot grubs pop out of the swollen belly of one of the dead corpses. "Absolutely not," he said, firmly closing the door. The far left room was another meat locker, this one in slightly better condition. The room was artificially cooled, and the walls had been painted a stark white. A number of meat hooks dangled from the ceiling. There were human corpses here, and, they all noticed, the butchered corpses of a number of horses as well. "Well, it was as you suspected, Rankle," said Aurelius sadly. "Looks like they killed members of the Taldan horse." "No," said Rankle. "There are only a handful of men here, unless the rest have all been sold off to savories or other places as cheap meats. It's not nearly possible that this would account for a full regiment of the Taldan horse going missing. But it's a clue, I think." They investigated the central room last. Another white-walled room. This one was mostly empty, save for a single sullen-looking young man, unconscious and tied to a chair. Demi cast a Cure Light wound spell on him, and gingerly tried to wake him. "Easy there," said Demi. "We're friends. We know you've been through an indescribable horror, but we're here to help." It took a moment for the young man to accept this was not another trick, some new and horrifying torture the Sakils had prepared for him. "My name is Erdman Navin. I'm the son of Archbanker Rundle Navin." Demi recognized the name. "The outspoken loyalist counselor that went missing some days ago." Yes, said Erdmund. "That's him. I followed a trail of clues that led me here. I was trying to rescue him. What a fool I've been. What a terrible fool. Those creatures captured me and have been torturing me ever since." "We'll rescue your father if we can," said Demi.
But I need you to focus and tell me, do you know how many of these monsters there are in the Slaughterhouse? There are 4, 3 in the central tower, and 1, their leader, is in the east tower. They call her Soraya. She is the largest and most horrifying of all of them. I think that's where she's keeping my father, too. Demi sighed deeply. She looked at the others. One more to deal with, they were all thinking. What's in the west tower? Asked Demi. I've no idea. They never seem to use it, said Erdmund. Hey, I have an idea, said Aurelius, stepping in. Erdmund, I assume the Navin family has a large, well-guarded home, since your father's on the Mercantile Council, and since all the members are the wealthiest citizens of Yanmas. Erdmund nodded nervously. Great. We need to get you and your father somewhere safe. We're also hiding another member of the council that's been targeted as well. Here's what I'd like you to do. We're going to send you home with our friend Enlil here. She'll keep you safe on the walk home. But I'm going to need you to tell us where your home is, okay? I'm going to send our other friends here, Gerda and Inga, to collect some allies of ours, and the counselor we are protecting, who's staying at an inn. She'll collect our friends and meet you back at your home. Erdmund nodded, and he looked up at Gerda. You can't miss it, he explained. It's the home in the Western Bountiful district that sits along the canal front, at its steepest bend. The walls around the building are all painted orange. I'll instruct the house guards to let you and the counselor in when I get there. Gerda looked sternly at Aurelius. Are you sure about this? There's still one more cycle to deal with, and Lel and I can help. Right now I'm more concerned about getting Sepsinia and High Priest Paliator to safety. The Navins have house guards and high walls. Let's get them out of the Whistling Wyvern now that we have a better option. We can deal with one last cycle, said Aurelius, and we'll meet you back at the Navin estate when we're finished up here. Rankle picked the lock on the rear door of the factory and eased it open. Come on now. It's time for the 4 of you to get out of here. Enlil, Inga, Gerta, and Erdmund left the building and headed to the safety of the Navin estate. Last thing left to do is to handle the boss in the East Tower, right? Asked Marius. Rankle stroked his chin. I think we should scope out the West Tower first. Best not to leave any stone unturned. The door of the West Tower was locked, but Rankle easily picked it. The lower West Tower room had clearly not been used in some time, as a thick layer of dust lay over everything. They followed the stairs in this room up to the upper West Tower. The top room of the West Tower was some kind of memorabilia storage that must have once belonged to the halfling brothers that owned the Slaughterhouse once. Shelves here contained several rolled rugs, tapestries, framed paintings, and documents, all stacked carefully and covered in a thick layer of dust. Most of the documents stored here prominently bore the symbols of Taldor, or Yanmas. One banner, though, hung unfaded, unaffected by the ravages of time, and curiously devoid of dust. Aurelius cast the Detect Magic spell, and it radiated with intense magical energy. Like Dignity's barb and Coriana's blade, here they had discovered another ancient Taldan relic. What is it? Asked Diyanah, as they stretched it out to get a better look. It was a banner, a meticulously woven flag depicting a horse and an elephant, both about to charge. The tapestry's green and blue drapery, and the noble teal colours of the beasts themselves, indicated the strong connection to Taldor's distinguished cavalry, in which both animals had long been the most commonly used kinds of mounts. It is an ancient standard of conquest, replied Demi, who recognized it from the history books. One of the few treasures brought back from the disastrous Sixth Army, when the Taldan Empire tried to seize the Kelishite lands of Western Garand, but were ultimately turned back by the armies of the Gorilla King in the Mwangi Expanse. It is said that when unfurled, the standard protects those standing near the standard-bearer, and it improves their speed also. If one of us attunes to it, we can unlock even greater powers still. The banner can teleport an allied company as though through the use of a dimension door spell. It can even be used to grant a regiment temporary flight. It's very powerful, but of course it has an obvious downside. It must be unfurled for its magic to function, and carrying a battle standard everywhere is a bit clunky. No, wait, this is awesome, said Diyanah. I've got an excellent idea, guys. He carefully pulled the standard off the wooden crossbeam, and then threaded his iron rope through it. Then he wound the whole standard around the rope, so one end of the rope was thicker than the other, but he could still loop the rope into a coil, and hook the whole thing on his belt. There, look at that. Packs really nicely, he said, and then he added, and now watch this. He grabbed the coil of rope and held it in his hand. Harden, he commanded. The rope suddenly went rigid, turning into a 10-foot-high pole. Where he had been previously holding a coil of rope, he was now holding the majestic standard, unfurled, and radiating all its power for those around him to see. Nice. I think it was high time for me to get a relic as well. A little later, Demi renewed her silent table spell, and they ventured into the lower east tower room. Several elaborate rugs of Kelishite design adorned the floors here, with additional rugs hanging from pegs that had been driven into the brick wall. The stone staircase ascended up to the second floor. Aurelius used his last invisibility sphere of the day, and they crept up the stairs. In the upper room, an overstuffed divan and an ottoman squatted near the top of the stone stairs. Several low couches and benches, all cushioned and draped with rugs and tapestries, were scattered around the room. A low desk leaned against the west wall, laden with papers and books. Sat at the desk was a man dressed in noble finery, almost certainly the banker and counsellor, Rundle Navin. Looming over him and stroking his face with a long, horrifying, insectile claw was the largest sackle they had yet seen, a monstrosity of a beast with a woman's face that was marred by a wide, crackling grin and a set of vicious fangs. This must have been Soraya, the Sackle leader. In quick, silent agreement, the heroes surged forward, weapons ready, slashing, cutting, punching, and shooting, trying as best they could to kill the monster before it fled to the safety of the ethereal plane. Soraya did not run, however. She battered Rankle aside with a stroke of one of her razor-sharp mantis claws. She deflected Coriana's blade with another. As Diyanah moved in close to punch, her voraciously fanged human face shot forward and buried its jagged teeth into his forearm. Even Soraya's prisoner, the ensorcelled banker Rundle Navin, got into the fight, drawing a blade and charging at Aurelius, who was caught off guard by the charmed man's viciousness. Demi was singing loudly then, all thoughts of stealth and subterfuge forgotten, and the warriors fought with renewed strength. Aurelius stepped aside, dazing the man with a cantrip, greasing the floor behind him and then kicking him down the flight of stairs. Aurelius could hear him bump down along the stairs and then scrabble for purchase down on the lower level. He'd be injured, thought Aurelius, but thankfully still alive when all this was over. Meanwhile, Rankle was back on his feet again, adding to the fray a spiritual weapon that struck at Soraya of its own accord. Soraya was getting overwhelmed by the combined strength of Marius, Rankle, and Diyanah, and so she began to pull away. Her body seemed to fade as she tried to slip away into the ethereal plane. Then something happened. Her body seemed to lock into the material plane. A look of panic was in her human-like eyes. A radiant energy seemed to hold her in place, and it was emanating from another figure that had appeared in the room. Diyanah wasted no time to second-guess the reasoning for this. He grabbed the iron rope and shoved a fist right through Soraya's fanged maw. "Harden!" he commanded. The standard of conquest unfurled inside the Sackle Queen, ripping her apart, and then Diyanah was stood, holding it, amidst the bloated, foul-smelling carcass of the dead monster. The party turned to face the newcomer. It looked at first like another monster, but Demi was quick to react. "Don't attack," she cried. "It's a psychopomp. It's not one of them." The figure was tall, almost 7 feet in height, but it was exceedingly thin, skeletal, actually, made of long bones of inky black. It was all bone, in fact, save for the black feathery wings that it folded against its back. It had a skeletal tail as well, and a bony bird skull, although on this skull he wore a mask of gold and red. In his right hand was gripped a mighty scythe. "You are well informed for a mortal," said the psychopomp. "I am indeed a psychopomp, a shepherd of the dead. I serve the goddess Pharasma, and the Sackles are our most hated and most ancient enemies." "Well, that should be the last of them," said Demi to the psychopomp. "I know. I have been tracking the activities of these 4 Sackles for a few weeks now. But as I am alone, I decided not to risk moving against them until now. We psychopomps do not normally present ourselves to the living, but you have proved yourselves formidable. Few mortals can kill 1 Sackle, never mind 4 of them. Consider me impressed. Perhaps we can help each other further. I am called Zan." "Hello there, Zan," said Demi. "I am Demetria. This is Aurelius, Marius, Diyanah, and Rankle," she said after a moment's hesitation, realizing there was no advantage to hiding what Rankle was to a being like Zan. Zan then took a few steps towards Diyanah, and he appeared to sniff the air around him. Although Diyanah was a good deal broader than the psychopomp, the skeletal creature was taller, and Diyanah couldn't help but be unsettled, and even slightly intimidated, as the thing examined him intently. "It is no coincidence we crossed paths, I think. This one smells of the soul of the lost boy. What do you know of this matter?" "Are you talking about Prince Carius?" asked Aurelius. "There was a child whose soul was hidden from Pharasma's record 20 years ago. That is a grave affront to the cosmic order. Someone knew what they were doing in concealing the soul. Now it has resurfaced. I have been following its signature. It is close by, likely in the city." Yeah, that makes sense, said Aurelius, and he looked at Demi. Well, that confirms your suspicions, Demi. The boy is indeed being resurrected here. At least we know we're in the right place.
Why have you been tracking the lost spirit?
Asked Zan.
And why does your monk friend smell of it?
Demi looked nervously at Diyanah. She wanted to make sure Zan didn't find any reason to blame Diyanah for what had transpired. Our friend Diyanah was used by an evil wizard to hide the spirit, as you say, but the wizard has since retrieved the soul, and we don't know where it is. Zan studied Diyanah suspiciously, but then relaxed, as much as a giant skeletal bird could be seen to relax at any rate.
Why now?
Asked Zan. You must know that the boy is important, said Aurelius. It's Prince Carius. He's the son of the Grand Prince of Taldor. Many in our country will consider him the true heir of the Empire. That's why the spirit was stolen, and that's why our enemies seek to resurrect him. They hope to use him to control the nation.
Your mortal politics bore me, and I find them beneath me. I am not here for all of that. This wizard has transgressed against the laws of death. The resurrection must be prevented before further damage is done to the natural fabric. I will take the spirit to the boneyard, where it should have gone 20 years ago.
While the rest of the party seemed to puzzle over Zan's mission, Diyanah seemed visibly relieved by hearing all this. Yes, he said, that would be great. We'd be highly indebted to you if you could prevent this resurrection and take Carius to whatever afterlife he needs to go to. Marius wasn't totally sure he agreed with this take, but he wasn't prepared to argue in front of the psychopomp.
Very well, said Zan. Then we are allies in this. We seek the lost spirit together. I have my own work to do during the day, however. I will seek you out tomorrow night and ask how your own investigation goes. Where do you stay in the city?
At the Gilded Baldachin, said Diyanah.
I shall seek you out then, until the night of the morrow,
said the skeletal creature. And then, just like the Sackles, it appeared to fade out of reality altogether. Guys, I think we need to talk more about this, said Marius, visibly discomforted by what had just happened. I agree, said Aurelius. But for now, what we actually need to do is to check on Councillor Navin downstairs and make sure he's okay, as I did kick him down a bunch of steps. Then we need to find a cart or a wheelbarrow to pile up the Sackle corpses and cover them up well, and then wheel them down to the Navin residence so that we can make a big show of revealing them to the council tomorrow morning. We should also reveal our successful rescue of Councillor Navin as well. And we should stay with him at the Navin residence tonight. I don't want any chance that Yander's party messes with us tonight at the Baldachin. We should decide if we even want to go back to the Baldachin on future nights as well. Councillor Navin was quite shaken, but physically in good health. It was well past midnight, though dawn was not yet breaking, by the time they reached the Navin residence. The town home of Rundle Navin wasn't as ornate as some of the noble palaces they had visited in recent months, especially when compared to the Palace of Birdsong or the Tibran Palace in Casimir, but it nonetheless stood as a testament to wealth and influence, perched gracefully by the canal. Rundle was a prosperous banker after all, and so his home was well defended, its walls painted a vibrant shade of orange that stood out boldly against the muted tones of the surrounding buildings. Atop these walls, intricate wrought iron spikes had been carefully installed, their presence a subtle yet effective deterrent against any who might consider scaling them. Aurelius was glad he had convinced the party to spend the night here. Inside the walls, the main structure itself was quite grand, and the canal, which flowed serenely beside the residence, added a layer of peace and tranquility to the city home. Large arched windows lined the front of the house, and the roof was tiled in deep polished terracotta. At the entrance, a pair of heavy oak doors, reinforced with iron bands and adorned with brass knockers shaped like lions' heads, stood as the primary gateway into the estate. The doors were flanked by well-manicured topiaries, each shrub trimmed into the form of a spiral, leading the eyes upwards towards the house's upper floors, where ornate balconies jutted out, their balustrades adorned with curling vines and flowering plants. House guards were on high alert when Aurelius and the others had come, bringing the wounded form of Councillor Rundle Navin back to his home. Rundle's son, Erdmund, and their other companions had already returned, so of course they were expected. Even after they were admitted into the main house, the Navin guards continued patrolling the perimeter with a practiced vigilance throughout the night. Inside, Erdmund embraced his father, and he thanked the heroes profusely for bringing him home safely. Goethe, Anlel, Sepsinia, their new ally Inga, and even Chief Enumerator Palliator were all present as well. None of them had been able to sleep, while the rest of the party was out fighting the Sackils. After a brief catch-up, though, their exhaustion caught up with them. Erdman escorted the entire party to the Navin home's guest rooms, where they all tried to get in whatever few hours of sleep there were left to catch up on that night. The Commerce Hall, Toil Day, first week of autumn, 4718. The following morning, Aurelius's company was at the Commerce Hall at the break of dawn. Rankle had summoned their escort Gregory via sending spell to get him to meet them at the hall, and they had dispatched him to request the councillors call an emergency early morning meeting. As it turned out, the councillors were already assembled, because of course, as Aurelius had suspected, word of the death of Principal Councillor Chief Enumerator Palliator had spread quickly when his body was discovered by his staff on the previous night. Given their urgent request, Aurelius and his party were escorted promptly into the council hall, which was in fact already assembled. Aurelius noted a new face among the councillors. Seated in the Baron's chair was the austere face of Baron Moston Custios. He was still looking a little harrow and worn from the weeks of nightmares he had been experiencing, but apparently they had subsided in the night, and he was already feeling well enough to attend their emergency session.
"Please, bring us your urgent matter,"
said the Baron to Aurelius, sternly as the party entered.
"As you can see, we were planning on doing a closed-door session today. Among the myriad other problems we have faced, one of our principals was murdered last night, and it's not lost on us that he died the very day that you all arrived."
"We're very sorry to hear that, your lordship," said Aurelius, "but we do have some good news we need to urgently share with you. We have identified and rectified the matter of the strange matters in Yanmas. I see already that you are in better health yourself, sir." Baron Custios nodded with interest.
"Explain,"
he instructed. "Yes, of course," said Aurelius. "First, though, some evidence." He waved in Marius, who approached with a covered wheelbarrow. Marius removed the covering and spilled the grotesque carcasses of the four Sackles onto the floor before the council. Some gasps could be heard audibly coming from the assemblage. "Now I shall have the Lady Demetria explain what you are seeing," said Aurelius, "as she is our resident expert in matters that are extraplanar in nature." Demi stepped forward to address the council. "What you see before you are the carcasses of 4 Ichko Sackles, cockroach-like creatures whose home lies somewhere in the ethereal plane. Sackles are creatures of horror, and they feed on human fear. They had been hiding in a place called the Sanguine Brothers' Slaughterhouse, and from there they had been spreading their pool of terror across the city of Yanmas. Soon you will see, now that these things have been killed, the citizenry who were afflicted by the cannibalistic nightmares will soon be in recovery." The Baron nodded acutely.
"I believe you, Lady Demetria, as last night I did feel as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. Something has shifted in the city. I will make sure you are all rewarded for your efforts, and I will extend our city's thanks to the Princess for sending this delegation as well."
"There's one more thing also," said Baron Aurelius. "The Sackles had also kidnapped one of your own." He then waved in Councillor Rundle Navin, who was welcomed eagerly by his various friends in the council. "He's still a little rattled from his experience as their prisoner, but he's quite all right, and I'm sure he'll be able to rejoin the council soon." Baron Moston Custios stood up and clapped.
"Thank you, Baron. That is great news. If we could ask you and your friends to investigate the murder of Chief Enumerator Palliator while you're looking into other matters, that would be appreciated as well."
"Of course, your lordship," said Aurelius, bowing low. As he did this, he could hear a commotion coming from down the hall. Earl Yander Mercandus was making his way down. "How could you start the council meeting without the Pytherius delegation?" he cried out in anger, and he stormed into the room. "Your lordship," he said, "there is no proof these creatures were behind the dreams. We are still conducting our own investigation." Yes, so very slowly," noted Diyanah. "Zip it, you," said Yander pointedly at Diyanah, but he was interrupted by the Baron banging his gavel.
"High Chair Lord Rudig Orton had warned me about this," declared the Baron of Yanmas. "We shall no longer be holding council with both delegations present. Baron Aurelius, have you any other news to report?"
"Only that we shall begin investigating the matter of the missing cavalry regiments today, and that we intend to find results," and he glanced meaningfully at Earl Mercandus as he said, "very quickly."
"Very well," said Baron Custios. "Then you are excused. Now, Earl Mercandus, wait for the Eutropia delegation to leave. Then you may offer us your own report, but not before."
As Aurelius and the others left, they were happy to note that Earl Yander Mercandus appeared to be fuming with rage. End of chapter. Thank you so much for watching. You've just watched Season 3, Episode 5 of my Pathfinder 616 series.
In this particular episode, this episode is called the Sanguine Brothers Slaughterhouse. The entire episode is basically one big dungeon crawl. They go to the slaughterhouse, they encounter a bunch of Sackills. After defeating the Sackills, they also have one final encounter, which is they meet Zan the Psychopomp. Zan was such a fun character to play. Every now and then, there's an NPC in one of these adventure paths that I lock in, I find the voice for, I know exactly where they're coming from, and they're just a hoot to play. So Zan was one of those characters. I had a blast playing Zan. I'll talk more about him in a minute. Let's start with a look at the dungeon crawl itself. So the Sanguine Brothers Slaughterhouse is quite different. It's not quite different. It's actually very close to the way it's presented in the book. But I made one big major decision, which is, and you probably, if you're aware of the adventure path, you probably detected this much earlier, because it becomes apparent who the villains are at Sanguine Brothers long before they actually go in there. But in the adventure path as written, the creatures at the Sanguine Brothers Slaughterhouse are divs. They're Pyraka divs, which are a type of extraplanar creature that can infiltrate dreams and modify, and do many of the things that we see the Sackills do in this episode. And that was as I read through this adventure path, I sort of knew almost immediately that this was a change I was going to make, because for a couple of reasons. First, there's an Ichko Sackill that the party is supposed to encounter at the Palace of Birdsong in Book 2. And because of the way that my party engaged with the Marat County sort of finale, and the fact that they ousted Count Lothide on their own turf, and investigating the Palace of Birdsong came to be kind of an aftermath sort of wrap-up thing, it never made sense for me to have that encounter there. So I had them sort of glimpse the Sackill as Panavar Lothide faded away, so they were aware of its presence. And I always knew that I was going to have that encounter with the Sackill later. And when I saw the divs, I realized this was the right place to make that swap. And the other thing that struck me is that in the last chapter, we have a creature that enters the dreams of the players and affects their dreams, which we see in the Palace of Birdsong. And then in this chapter, we also have a creature that enters dreams and affects the dreams of the citizens. And the fact that they're two completely different types, and that there's no relationship between one and the other, it just felt thematically inconsistent. A Panavar Lothide is allied with the Sackills. There is a big Sackill tormentor that is aiding and abetting him. And since I didn't have the Sackill encounter in Book 2 anyway, these were the right villains for me. Now, switching from divs to Sackills does introduce some greater challenges, because one of the things that the Sackills can do is they can drift into the ethereal plane more or less at will. In Book 2, you were intended to encounter one of those, and I was going to have my players encounter 4 of them, which is a pretty significant challenge to overcome. But once again, my players proved very resourceful. They have the player that plays Diyanah surprised me in game with the fact that he had taken the empty body monk ability, which allowed him to go ethereal. And that was, I think that in many ways made this whole encounter manageable, because I think that otherwise a lot of the Sackills would have ultimately gotten away and plagued the players in later events. We also meet the Navins for the first time. The Navins will be some additional NPCs that we see kind of recur throughout the rest of this adventure, and they also start to use the Navin residence as kind of their home base. They still make some use of the Gilded Baldachin, but by and large they start to transition into the Navin residence as their primary base of operations for the rest of their Yanmass adventure. Let's finally talk about Zan. Zan is a fun character. Zan's objective on this earth is to go and essentially either prevent the resurrection of Prince Carius, or if he does get resurrected, to kill him outright, because he feels it's his mission to take the soul of Carius to the Boneyard. That is Pharasma's will,
and he's almost a Pharasman extremist, and the book makes it clear that you're essentially intended to present Zan as kind of an antagonist figure. And here we see one of the main discrepancies between when the book wants you to zig, sometimes your players will want to zag, and this is a place where that happens. So the threat of Zan killing Carius was not a threat to most of my players. They were not invested in the rescue of Prince Carius. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, mostly related to the way that I gave the players more free rein about how they approach this mission and this adventure. I think if Martella had come out at the beginning and said, hey, your mission is to rescue Carius for the princess, they would have had a different outlook. But they didn't have that outlook. So ultimately, most of the players, except maybe Marius, were like, all right, Zan, you're on our side. We're Team Zan, go kill him. And I think the other really exciting thing, now you know what, this will actually pay off in a future episode, so I'm not going to touch on the other fun thing that happens with Zan. I'll save that for a future episode. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed this episode and are looking forward to more. Do the like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you next time.